All right, so let's dive into Glenwood Canyon. So first of all, where is Glenwood Canyon? Glenwood Canyon is in the western part of Colorado in the Rocky Mountains. Probably most people listening are familiar with this. They've probably driven down I-70 here. Yeah, it's a steep canyon. There's granite kind of the bottom of the canyon by Colorado River, and then it goes into a sequence of sedimentary layers kind of at the top. There's some really interesting geology there. And probably what you haven't seen, I know you probably haven't seen lately, is these new big fans that are in the Colorado River. Those all happen this summer. You can see where it's squeezing the river to, sometimes less than half of the original width. So that's new. I want to introduce you to the Grizzly Creek Fire that happened in 2020 in the Glenwood Canyon. So Grizzly Creek Fire started on the 10th of August. It ended up burning 13,000 hectares. It wasn't fully contained until December 18th. Luckily, nothing happened in the fall following the Grizzly Creek Fire. So we sort of dodged a bullet. There wasn't a big rainstorm. And winter was pretty quiet. But then we had summer monsoon in 2021. That resulted in really big debris flows. These wildfire disturbances create ideal conditions for landscape change, particularly debris flows. And Glenwood Canyon was hit hard by a lot of debris flows that following summer in 2021. All right, so Alex, we've been looking for a source of initiation for these debris flows. We've come up from the channel. We're here on the hill slope. We're about 400 meters below the ridge, and we haven't seen any kind of distinct initiation. But we have seen some signs of overland flow. So how would you describe this overland flow that we see here?
So I see a series of rills right about here, going across the slope, maybe a group of 5 or so, about 10 centimeters deep, 10 to 20 centimeters wide. Pretty subtle. You really have to be looking for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, nothing distinct.
Yeah, these are pretty subtle rills. Obviously, there's been some regrowth since last summer when we had the debris flows, but there's still some obvious rills where, we could see there was overland flow. Yeah, that's probably because after the fire, there was less infiltration into the ground. So this runoff that's creating these rills, it's more of a distributed source of material, unlike a discrete landslide. This is French Creek. This is in the Glenwood Canyon watershed. This is part of the Grizzly Creek Fire that burned in 2020. French Creek had a small little debris flow. It wasn't gigantic. It came down and it scoured, looks like some of the valley walls. So you can kind of see over to the left that you scoured and you left behind some exposed tree roots of where the bank used to be. By the end of the summer of 2021, after a debris flow came down, this had filled in pretty much completely with sediment. It's like a ramp. And now it looks like this summer, there's no debris flows, just water flows that have been cutting down, reworking this, leaving behind some terraces. Yeah, maybe we should look at the sediment here to look at what the debris flow sediment looked like. All right, so let's look at this sediment. What do you think? Do you believe that it's matrix supported? That's what we usually see here at debris flows.
I do. If you pull clasts out of the deposit, you can see that there's this kind of fine-grained sediment that's on all the preserved edges, kind of separating the larger clasts. So
yeah, okay.
I think it's matrix supported.
Okay, yeah, so matrix supported fine-grained sediment supporting the clast. So this is different than what we would see if this was a fluvial deposit where it'd be sorted. We might see some like imbrication and it'd be clast supported, but this is more matrix supported, unsorted sediment. There's definitely boulder sized clasts, but also a lot of gravel and sand in here. Nothing's gigantic in this section of deposit. We don't see any like really, really large, like meter sized boulders here.
Right.
Some of the rocks are very angular, which is they haven't gone very far. They've broken off of cliffs. This is like a limestone that's probably been chipped off a cliff pretty recently, and it's still retaining almost a rectangular kind of shape. Pretty sharp edges for a rock that you'd find in a deposit. So it's certainly not a fluvially turbulent flow. This seems like it came off of a cliff or something, some of the limestone that's really local here and hasn't been transported very far. Just got entrained in this debris flow and was moving down with that matrix. All right, so I'm here with Alex and we were just looking at some splash marks on a tree from the debris flow. These splash marks have the mud that was being transported in the flow. So Alex, about how tall would you say those splash marks are on the back of that tree?
A little more than 2 meters.
Wow, over 2 meters. What about on the front here?
Probably closer to about 50 centimeters.
Okay, so the flow that was coming from upstream is splashing up. That's why it's making that 2 meter height upstream, but the flow depth on the front, it cuts down to about 50, which is probably more reflective of the actual flow depth. Anything else on the back of this tree? Any kind of impacts or anything like that?
Yeah, on the upstream side, we see about 75 centimeters of debarking.
Wow, okay, 75 centimeters of debarking. So rocks and debris that's in the flow is actually hitting the tree and it's taking the bark right off the tree. It's impacting it. Okay, and it looks like, yeah, this sediment is actually stuck on there for over a year since the last debris flow. So that's kind of a long time for that sediment to just be stuck on the back of a tree. So this is a pretty small debris flow here, but it illustrates some interesting features. In particular, levees that are off to either side of the debris flow. So levees developed as you have a surge front coming down and it's moving sediment off to either side as the front comes down a channel. So here, this initiated on a hill slope. There's a burned area above, and also probably the cliffs that you can see help to create a lot of runoff that helped to kick off this debris flow. There are rock falls every winter here, like pretty big rock falls, that come down on the road. So Alex, we're down here at the bottom of French Creek by the bike path and looking at the debris flow deposit. It looks a lot like machines have gotten in and kind of cleaned out this portion of the debris flow. From your perspective, what are some of the things that you're seeing about how the debris flow is moving and accumulating in this fan here?
Yeah, so right in front of us, we have this concrete bike path, and it looks to me like the bike path caught up a majority of the flow and kind of acted as a dam, and then routed the flow to either side. Down to our left over here, we have some damage to the bike path. It looks like it's recently been repaired. That suggests to me that maybe some flow overtopped it in that location after being rerouted when it first hit the bike path.
Yeah, it absolutely looks like that. I mean, the freeboard underneath the bike path at this point is maybe 50 centimeters, and it's completely buried in a few places. So this very sturdy concrete bike path has kind of operated as a dam. Luckily, downstream from here, the highway, I-70, is actually elevated. And so luckily this debris flow was caught up here mostly in this fan, and then any of the sediment that made it downstream is not hitting the highway because it's super elevated. Yeah, what about some of the vegetation and things that we see buried up here?
Yeah, so it looks like we have some trees on the fan right down here, as well as further upstream. And it looks like those trees have been buried by a good bit of sediment.
Yeah, they definitely seem to be buried by sediment. And I can even see some woody debris here that looks like it's come down in the debris flow itself. So this is maybe somewhat of a low energy environment by the time it was making it down to here. It seems like a few of the boards were broken on the bike path, but clearly not all of the boards were broken. So maybe we were starting to really enter the deposition phase of this debris flow here. All right, so here we are on the bike path. We can definitely see that flow has made it underneath and deposited a lot of sediment. There's a pile that seems to be reworked by heavy machinery. What about boards that have broken? Yeah, can you kind of identify a few of those for us, Alex?
Yeah, so it does look like flow went over the bike path. We can see right over here.
Yep, that board definitely seems new, so that broke. Yep.
And there's a few more just off to our right here, suggesting that the flow did make it over the bike path. But like we said earlier, it does look like a vast majority of the sediment was caught upstream of the path, and relatively little. While some did deposit downstream, I'd say most got caught up just upstream.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the gap underneath the bike path? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so if we look at the freeboard, like Francis said earlier, only maybe about 50 centimeters of space between the flow surface and the bike path.
So we're actively working with the data from Glenwood, specifically rainfall, field observations, LiDAR, and aerial imagery to try to better understand the debris flow processes that happened in Glenwood Canyon.